and this is the Incongruous channel, and I'm Dr. Andy Yates. Now on Saturday on Beetroot Radio, www.beetrootradio.co.uk, that's where the player is, so you can listen live 7x24. On Saturday, I recorded a show called Planet X Niburu, okay? And I've taken that show, recorded it, squeezed it down, took out the music, some ads and stuff like that, and then put that on my website, www.drandyyates.com, and it's there as a podcast. It's on the front page. You just hit the podcast button, you'll get that straight away, or you can go into the menu and check out the podcast. There's over 60 of them there. You get the drill. All right, so we were talking about Planet X Niburu. And the thing about Planet X Niburu is there are kind of like three areas that I looked at. And one of them is the obvious one, if you're an ancient astronaut theorist or a conspiracy theorist or whatever, is the idea that an Anunnaki came to the Earth and messed about with human beings. And then there is the idea that Niburu, the planet they came from, is this rogue planet that's zipping around everywhere that could be a big threat to Earth. And then there's all the scientific stuff. So there's kind of three different areas here. So we'll see if we can cover them quickly so you can get a feel for that show. And then if you want to, go to my website, www.dryates.com, and check out the full show, about 1.5 hours, that checks it in detail with some scientific data that I kind of stumble through because it's a lot of numbers and a lot of different stuff and some concepts about the solar system, which maybe in the sort of 20 minutes I'm aiming for on this, I'll have a chance to talk about. Anyway, let's start with the Anunnaki. Now, in 76, Dr. Zecharia Sitchin, an American-Russian journalist, I think, or he's an author for sure, he looked at some Sumerian tablets and different writings and stuff from Sumeria and Babylon, and he translated them, and he came out with this legend, this mythology of the Anunnaki. And that's not just Sitchin, because it is also available. I know there's translations on Oxford University's done one, and the legend, the mythology, if you like, is real. All right, this is not made up stuff. But then Sitchin kind of stretched it a bit and talked about this idea of Niburu, a planet, a failed sun, like a brown dwarf, which had 7 planets around it that's coming back to us, and all this kind of thing. So he said these were Anunnaki, were a race of extraterrestrial beings, and they came to our planet Earth 500,000 years ago. Okay. Now, there's no evidence that that happened, but that's what he said, the tablets said. Also, and this is the important bit, according to him, the Anunnaki engineered Homo erectus to become Homo sapien. And there's various theories about that. One is that they wanted to help them mine gold. The other one was that Noah's flood destroyed their buildings and they wanted them rebuilt. And the buildings we're talking about, things like the pyramids. So they built the megalithic structures, or at least humans built the megalithic structures under the instructions of the Anunnaki. And I do actually have another show. It's called UFO and Aliens on my website. It's in the paranormal category, I think. And it talks about the Anunnaki theory and the relationship between the Anunnaki, the Pleiadians, the reptilians, the Greys, and all of that. So check that out if you're interested. Anyway, the idea of the Anunnaki, as I said, they remodified our genetic structure so that we became more able slaves. Gave us a bit more intelligence, I suppose, the ability to follow complex orders. And the interesting part of this is a lot of these mythologies kind of run close to other mythologies and other things that actually happened in history. The particular one I'm thinking of is at the end of the Younger Dryas, which was the kind of spike at the end of the Ice Age. Human beings, that is Homo sapiens, changed from being hunter-gatherers to being farmers and city builders. And that's a major change. Why would they change after 200,000 years? That's a good question. There's never really been any definition on that. And this is the theory, is that the Anunnaki changed them for that purpose, or maybe changed them before and then they developed, as we humans do, to have a rebellious spirit, and then rebelled against our masters, the Anunnaki, who were the gods, who may also have been the Egyptian gods. And then we said, get lost, you lot. And basically they kind of legged it out of here. Okay, so that's that one side. The other side is the Niburu cataclysm, which is the idea of this rogue planet, or a sun, like a brown dwarf failed sun, because you know that a sun has to be a certain mass before it becomes a star, because the atomic action inside it won't start unless it's got a certain gravitational field. I think that's the way it goes. But anyway, and this thing's going around with its 7 planets, and some people say it's inside the inner part of the solar system, which is like, well, whatever you say. Some people say it's outside, and I'll explain some of that in a moment when I talk about the more scientific side of this thing. And then, and this is obviously going to be a cataclysm that's waiting to happen on Earth. Well, we're not really seeing that, because if we go on to the science of it now, you got to know that there's the solar system, right? There's 8 planets, because they demoted Pluto, which was the 9th planet, to a dwarf planet. So there's 8 planets. So going inwards, outwards, it's Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. And then there's this thing called the Kuiper Belt, which is further out, which is like a ring of bits and bobs, rocks and ice. Out there is also some dwarf planets, Pluto, Erin, Makemake, there's another one I can't remember the name of. And then outside that is a gap. So from 48 astronomical units, I don't want to explain that, but anyway, well, I can. An astronomical unit is basically the distance between the Earth and the Sun. So plus 48 AU from the Sun, there's this gap. And then at about 200 AU from the Sun, there's a thing called the Oort cloud, which is basically comets. And it's kind of interesting because the Oort cloud is like a sphere, right, around the Kuiper Belt inside, and then the planets inside that. But the planets and the Kuiper Belt are kind of flat like this, whereas the Oort cloud is round around it. Okay, that's quite important, because I'm going to make a point in a minute. Now, NASA, California University of Technology, and all kinds of things have been out there looking for a thing they called Nemesis. And Nemesis was this idea that there might be this rogue thing out there. Of course, they wouldn't say it was Niburu, but this rogue thing that was out there that might be a threat to Earth, and best we should know about it, or at least they might find out about it and then keep it a secret, because that's what governments do, don't they? Anyway, so they did a lot of work with different telescopes and the infrared telescopes and surveys and stuff, because what they do now is they take a picture of the whole sky, like the night sky, if you want to put it that way, and then they take it over several days, and then they compare it using computer technology to see if how those little objects that they're taking pictures of are moving. And they do this over the whole sky again and again and again and again, and then they get a view for how everything's moving up there, and then they can make kind of definitions, theories, assumptions on what they see from all this data, which is brilliant, really. And of course, they went through all this process and they did not see anything that fits the description of Nemesis / Niburu. They just didn't see it, but they did find a bunch of other stuff. And it's interesting because one of the reasons they were looking is because the stuff that's in the Kuiper Belt kind of didn't act normally. And they kind of wondered, well, why is this happening? And then they worked out, well, one of the facts is that it must be disturbed by something. They also wondered about that gap between the edge of the Kuiper Belt at 48 AU and the start of the Oort cloud at 200 AU. Why is there a clear gap in there, or at least a gap with very few objects in it? And the thought was, well, if a big old planet went through the middle of that gap, it would disturb everything else that was in there, maybe push it to the side, maybe suck it in, whatever. Sorry if you can hear my little dog, right? Whinging. There's the big dog. Next door neighbour's got a puppy, and these are girl dogs, and they don't like to hear a puppy cry. So they go out and they squeak themselves, and then they talk through the fence and bark and do different stuff. You wanted to know that, didn't you? Because it's all to do with Planet X Niburu. It's the Anonymous channel. It's the Incongruous channel. Okay, it is what it is. Anyway, so that's the idea. There's this gap, and they wondered what that was about. So they were all trying to study this and so on and so on. But as yet, they haven't found Niburu, but they have found planets, you've got to call them, because they're fairly big in size. You're talking 500 kilometers in size. And they have a different orbit, which no one kind of understands, and said, well, if they've got a different orbit, something must have caused that different orbit. So you know I described that we're on a disk, okay? And then the Oort cloud, this spherical thing around the disk. You might say in between my fingers are the planets, the 8 planets. And then my fingers represent the Kuiper belt. So from this side it looks like a disk. From this side it would look like that. You get it? It's like a ring, a disk. What they're trying to say is, you know, perhaps something is actually rotating at a different angle. In other words, not in this plane, but in that plane. Do you get it? So around and around like that. Because if that were happening and it was an elliptical orbit, when it's here, it would be close to the Kuiper belt. When it's here, it would be a long way from the Kuiper belt. So you get that idea of it going round and round like this, how that would cause that issue. Tell you what, that's really hard to describe on the radio. And I talked in terms of a ring donut within a balloon within the eye, the London Eye, with its gondolas going around. Listen to the show. It's fun just for that definition. Anyhow, so and that's actually quite a good explanation, because as this other disk goes around, as the objects, not a planet, but a collection of objects, of icy objects with a lot of mass altogether, they would have a gravitational field that would affect the Kuiper objects and do all of this. What's the relevance to Planet X Niburu? Nothing. Because there is no Planet X Niburu by that theory. Okay, but there's plenty of other theories that says there is. And I kind of love these things because, as I said, you kind of want to ask the thing, well, if there is an object out there, could it be Pluto, could it be Eris, could it be Makemake, one of those? How did the Sumerians and Babylonians know? Because we can't actually see them, because they're cold and dark. They're not suns or anything. They're cold and dark, and we only know them by using infrared scans and these wide sky scans and stuff like this with our technology. So that would be one thing an ancient astronaut theory would latch onto and say, oh yeah, that's it, that's what it is. And there were various reports which I've detailed in my show about, whistleblowers from NASA who said, oh no, we were studying this, we were looking at this. But the fact is NASA did do this big investigation and they came up with nothing to do with the planet, a big planet that's going around. But they did come up with something regarding these other objects that they're found, and I'm sure they will continue to find these in the future, because the mystery of what they call the Kuiper Cliff, the end of the Kuiper belt at 48 AU, and that gap up to about 200 AU where the Oort cloud starts, is kind of interesting. Why is there nothing in there? Something must have happened. It's that sort of stuff. So there we are. Really, that's about it. We've no notice of it coming back. Would we see it if it were coming back? Well, some of the theories say that this rogue planet, Niburu, and rogue dark star, Niburu, and its 7 planets that are going around, which is what Sitchin said there was, is actually inside the inner solar system, so within our planetary system. But if that was so, I mean, every weekend there are thousands of amateur astronomers with very powerful equipment and great experience and understanding of the universe, understanding of the universe, who are lying on their backs studying this stuff. They'd find it. For sure they would. NASA often uses amateur astronomers to verify their findings and also to provide indications of somewhere in the sky that's a good place to look. So you've got to think that. But isn't the theory of the Anunnaki quite exciting? Because basically what you're talking about is the Anunnaki changing our genes, basically changing us from Neolithic to Mesolithic. Okay? So maybe doing something with our frontal cortex to make us more human, more able to think in a logical and analytical fashion, rather than the mammalian brain or the reptilian brain. We actually were able to think better. And of course that was their undoing, because they had a rebellion and kicked them out or whatever. But you get how it's interesting. This is what interests me in this stuff, because I'm not an expert on this stuff. If you listen to my show, you'll hear me get tangled up in the numbers and stuff like this, because I'm jack of all trades, master of none. But it's so interesting, because when you can think outside of that box, here's my box again, when you can think outside of that box, you can actually connect things that people like astrophysics, Neil deGrasse Tyson or whatever, don't go there, because they have their, this is what I believe, here it starts, here it ends. Now, if you're out of the box, you can think anywhere. You can tie conspiracy theory, you can tie paranormal evidence, you can tie meta-science to actual Newtonian, Cartesian and quantum science. You can tie it all together in some fashion, because you can see the overview rather than looking at this little area like this. And that's all I say is I recommend to you. So anyway, that's my thought dump on the show. Check it out if you want to. Next one I'm going to be doing is on Are You Being Controlled, is the working title. And it's some stuff about the UK, mainly. I also talk about MK Ultra and things like that, of how we have been controlled. There's no doubt we have been. There's no doubt we are. Even if it's what we might say is kind of okay, like propaganda and influence and advertising and stuff like this. And also the way social media has the ability to control us, if that's their mandate, if that's their hidden agenda. So that should be an interesting show. But that'll be 2 weeks' time, because the radio show, Beetroot Radio, is doing a full days of broadcasting from the Party in the Park in Rushden. And so I'm not going to be able to do my show in the evening. But I've prepared the other one, will be there, and looking forward to giving it to you. So just bear in mind that it's funny, isn't it, that something that came from a Babylonian legend that was debatably translated by Zachariah Sitchin, but has also been translated by other people, and the legend, the mythology is real. Whether it's true is a different matter. How that can then end up with NASA doing these big kind of surveys of the sky and stuff like this. But then, of course, they're also looking at near-Earth objects, because my personal opinion is that some of the governments are getting pretty nervous about these idea of near-Earth objects. That is, meteors, asteroids that are out there that could bang into the Earth. Even if they're fairly small, they could do a lot of damage and change our life. So we really need to point one of our nuclear missiles up there to push it out of the way, not blow it up, but push it out of the way. Big dog. Rather than having it there to destroy people. You get what I'm saying. This is the Incongruous channel. I'm Dr. Andy Yates. Don't forget, like, share and subscribe on YouTube, please. If you enjoyed what I'm doing, if you didn't enjoy it, if you want to give me a thumbs down, whatever, just put that mark on there like this so that more people will see this. All right? Okay. Dr. Andy Yates. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Take care.